local government have never really cracked it in terms of making things accessible, really slick, really easy to use.
Provide services and give money, it's just very difficult to do that. So we're trying to sort of streamline that, but we're working to have this be a place where you can have a sort of different relationship with government.
But a RAG system has no clue whether this is an action, whether it's a question or what sort of thing. So without diligently designing that, and normally that's through the process of, conversation design essentially, my kind of interest is to figure out whether knowledge graphs can be used to almost give the model an idea of what does this question actually mean, what should then come next, and how do I take the user along to actually solve a problem without having to hand script everything like we used to do in the old days.
It's a cliche, but we're only just getting started.
This conversation is with Pete Kowalczyk. Pete is an AI conversation designer at GDS, Government Digital Service. And this conversation is all about how do you take something like the British government with all of its vast amount of content and its huge, wide breadth in terms of its user base, and how do you make AI experiences for those services and those individuals in a way that is easy to use and effortless and that meets the precedent that has been set over the last 15 years by the British government in terms of its digital service provision. How do you mask the cracks in legacy systems and still create worthwhile experiences? How do you map content with actions so that people can actually get stuff done rather than just be told how to get stuff done? How do you use things like what's making a bit of a comeback now is state management, context management, and how do you use that to understand the user's goal? And once you understand the user's goal, using knowledge graphs to help plan how might you be able to take the user closer towards getting their issues resolved. We talk a lot also about how the role of a designer has gone from being one of, which is predominantly a creative role, to now in AI being more of a kind of technical role. You need to have a little bit of technical prowess, if you like. But actually, according to Pete, it's actually moving now back towards being more creative. And we also discuss a little bit about why we're a little bit stuck in this resolution rut. All of the use cases around customer service, customer support, and less around how do you make things more engaging and deliver value that's perhaps a little bit unexpected and go above and beyond and use these models for what they're really, really good at. If you are an individual or a business that's looking to create really effortless experiences and really level up your game as far as the quality of the experiences that you provide through your AI agents to your users, then this is a conversation with Pete Kowalczyk that you do not want to miss. All right, Pete. Hello. Welcome. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
Pleasure. It's been a little while. We met at the meetup that we did in London in, was it April time? I think it was.
Yeah.
It feels like a lifetime ago now. And I'd been interested in having this conversation. It took a while to get kind of around to it or whatever, but I appreciate you joining us. And I was really interested in the talk that you gave, really interested in the work that you've been doing around kind of conversation design and AI model design at GDS. And I'm sure that, a lot of the stuff that you were sharing then, and obviously the stuff that you've been working on, I think there's a lot of people who learn a lot from it. So I appreciate you joining me.
Yeah, no worries. Likewise, Kane. It's good to be here. Yeah, I think I can add, I've got a sort of background in content design and writing, and then sort of found myself in this position about 3.5 years ago, when ChatGPT's models became more available and public. And so I think like everyone, I've been sort of scrambling to figure out, well, how do you design with this material? I've been doing it. Yeah, I've started at BBC. We're working on LLM-based sort of chatbots, and then OVO Energy moved more into like customer service. Vanguard, the bank, I was there for a bit, and I've been at GDS for about a year, I think. And they're all different domains, and it's interesting because we're using this conversational, let's call it a material, but we're applying it in different ways for different means. And with GDS, our sort of challenge really is remove the burden of this massive, complex organization, that's just got processes everywhere, lots of forms and hoops to jump through. And government wants to provide services and give money, it's just very difficult to do that. So we're trying to sort of streamline that and adapt it to people's personal situation, so they don't have to like wade through loads of generic stuff. And the actual, probably we'll talk more about the GDS stuff today, but the goal really is it's an app that it already exists as the app, and we have an LLM chatbot in there already. But we're working to have this be a place where you can have a sort of different relationship with government, where it can preempt what you might need and do a lot of the form filling for you. There's a timeline to these things, and some of it's more ambitious, or but there's some near-term stuff that we're working on that's like agentic and quite interesting. So
interesting.
We can talk about it.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. That's interesting. So when you started work, so you had a lot of experience around content design. Those companies you mentioned, Ovo, Vanguard. Were you working with LLMs in those companies as well, or did that start at GDS?
BBC, Ovo, and Vanguard was all LLMs. BBC was like I forget what you call it, a brownfield. Like there was no product there, so we just started with LLMs and just thought, what might we be able to do? That was with bite-sized content, so it was for kids studying.
Right, nice. Yeah, BBC was always a little bit out in front on that, wasn't it? I remember they were all over Alexa, trying different story formats and all that kind of stuff back in the day. Yeah,
it's funny, isn't it? These things come and go, and now they were designing skills quite early on at BBC, I think, for their Alexa. And yeah, I'm sure a lot of that learning went into the future stuff, but they do sort of come and go, these things.
Yeah, absolutely. That's good. Yeah, so I mean, I never worked at GDS or central government, but I did work a lot of time in local government, and I can completely relate to what you're saying there in terms of like, from a user's perspective, they just want to get to an outcome, and there is this almost like huge bundle of process and red tape and all that sort of stuff that comes with every layer of government, and local government have never really cracked it in terms of making things accessible, really slick, really easy to use. I think central government probably have done a lot better job with the formation of GDS and the big effort towards kind of like content design and making things more accessible and all that kind of stuff. So I would say that from like 2012, when I first come across it, to now, I think that what the like gov.uk, where that is today compared to where it was, is leaps and bounds ahead of what was there before. But obviously AI is now something completely different. So where do you start kind of taking, what GDS does and starting to apply that in a kind of AI first world? Where do you sort of start with something like that?
Yeah, that's the crux of it, really. I think there's one of the elephants in the room might be that revolution, let's call it a smaller revolution of Gov.uk bringing everything together and just writing for the web and having it written around user needs. Obviously, that really helps with LLMs being able to parse information. But the elephant in the room really with that is that the systems underneath are still quite distributed and different and require different authorization and these kind of things. So one challenge of doing these big transformation projects, multi-year transformation, is what is a middle ground, or what could be a middle ground, to get experiences into people's hands that do the work without needing to basically reform all of government. And one layer that we're designing with is like putting knowledge graphs in between the agents and government systems to give it a clearer sense of what is where and what needs actioning, and rather than tidying up all the underlying data, having this translation layer, which I could, it's quite an abstract thing, but I can try and explain a bit of that.
Yeah, that'll be useful. Yeah, because I think knowledge graphs is something that is starting to become spoke about quite a bit more. But I think there's still a lot of companies that just essentially have, RAG setups, which is just a vector database and an LLM on top, and that's kind of as far as it goes. But I think like the the mapping relationships between content, and obviously in GDS's case, it's content and its services, and there's a whole kind of bunch of stuff that goes with it. So maybe it'd be worth explaining, how you leverage knowledge graphs, kind of what they are, where they sit, how they kind of put together, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So yeah, to begin with, we do have this LLM-based product that's live, which is a RAG-based system, and it's it does what it says on the tin, and it's good at it. It's a question answering machine, really, and it's I think a lot of good work's been put into it. In addition to that, what we're trying to move to is move to actions, like you said, rather than answers, move to actions. And the problem with RAG is it's not really clear what is something that's an API endpoint that I can read and write to, versus something that's informational. And you get into this odd loop of telling people how to do things without helping them do the thing, like, putting the burden back on them. And it's a very difficult problem to visualize without just creating loads of examples and showing how the burden it looks, by all measures, the RAGAS measurements like completeness and accuracy and groundedness, all of those are tick, 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 but you still not really solved a problem for someone. And the beauty of these knowledge graphs is it can show you relationships between bits of data. So it can say, this is the information someone needs, this is the API you need to push information to. You can only use this when X, but you need to do this thing first, kind of, It shows those, that's what I mean by relationships, like you need to do this first and that. So it's a tool, really, that the agent reads selectively when it needs to. And just some quick examples might be, if someone's asking, what's the VAT rate, you don't need to go and read the knowledge graph and figure out what the services are, because it's quite a self-contained thing to answer. If someone's asking about updating their driving license, it might be that you can tell them generically what to do, but then you might say, oh, hey, if you tell me when the address changed or whatever, I can give a tailored response. And then you're in a situation where actually I could push that for you if you like, or you can do it yourself. And it's this, that's what I was talking a bit about at the meetup the other day, is these things are quite simple rules, but they end up looping and creating these quite rich experiences where the capabilities of the model reveals itself over time. So let's say, for example, I want to update my driving license. It's okay, cool. You want to update your address? Great. In the models that we're prototyping, we're using our knowledge graph to recognize, oh, this is part of the moving house cluster of things. So once we've achieved that first task, we can then retrieve other related tasks and suggest that. But importantly, we're doing it in a way where if you just want to get that thing done and go out into the sun, you can do that. It's not this onerous process that you're locked into. So that's the sort of balance, trying to offer things and always giving people the option.
Yeah. And would you say that I think one of the challenges of, I suppose, out of the box RAG is that the system has no clue what the user is trying to do. So, as you said, they're just question and answer machines. So, ask a question, get an answer, a good answer, but it's an answer. And for example, if you want to change your address on your passport or your driving license, it's going to tell you what to do in order to do that. And the limitation of them systems is that you're straight away back into conversation design, which is that if someone asks, how do I change my address on my driving license, there's a subtext to that, which is, I need to do this action. And they're asking the question in a way that sounds like it's a request for information, but it's not. It's actually a request for an action. But a RAG system has no clue whether this is an action, whether it's a question or what sort of thing. So without diligently designing that, and normally that's through the process of, conversation design essentially, my kind of interest is to figure out whether knowledge graphs can be used to almost give the model an idea of what does this question actually mean, what should then come next, and how do I take the user along to actually solve a problem without having to hand script everything like we used to do in the old days. Is that something that you're working on? Am I reading between the lines right there?
Yeah, it's a relief to hear people talking about that, to be honest, because you see that in 2003, I guess it was, 2023. I was concerned about that, but it's a very hard thing to show, and people would sometimes, try and just make the case that, it doesn't matter, we're all good, like we've answered the question, so therefore we're good. But that challenge is what I've been working on primarily, probably in all those different places. And if I just focus on the GDS stuff, because it's a bit more recent and easier to sort of recall, what we've got in our prototypes is, yes, we do capture semantically what people are saying, but we also capture pragmatically, well, what do they mean, or what are they trying to do? And we call it a goal, or you can have more than one goal. But it's interesting what you're saying there about how to use knowledge graphs, because there's always a cost to everything, right? Tokens, but also just compute. And you can feasibly have access to a knowledge graph and have the agent, infer, here are all the possible actions. Is the user trying to do any of those? Therefore, one of those actions might be what they're trying to do. But for some goals, it's not worth the effort. So you can, in one of our prototypes, we just have the model there's a separate agent, so it's a separate LLM call that just looks at it being the intent or the semantically what the user said, and just thinks like reasons what they're trying to achieve, and then sends that back as a string back to the orchestrator agent. And that's just done on this parametric, it's normal training data. So I think you can get away with these less context-aware ways of getting down into some kind of notion of a goal. It is early days at GDS around that, so it might be worth us trying different approaches. But I think like in the kicker of it is like you want to have somewhere a stored like object which says, here's what we think the user's trying to achieve. And therefore we can talk about it, but that unlocks a lot of functionality capabilities from there. And without it, I think you're right, it's a bit of a word association game, like tennis. Did you mean this? Did you mean this? And it's not scaffold. There's no scaffolding to like pin it to something.
That's interesting. So when at the meetup you were talking about, I think you kind of alluded to it earlier, is the notion of I can't remember exactly what you call it. It was something around loops and simple loops make complexity or something like that. It was something to do with the whole kind of designing that loop, wasn't it? I wonder if you can explain kind of what that means and what you meant by that.
Yeah. So I'll just speak about it quite technically, I guess, and see if it needs clarifying. So what I mean by that is we take an input, the system takes an input into an orchestrator node in the system, which has a task of deciding what to do. And the way that we've been experimenting is, let's take that input, send a call to figure out what pragmatically are they trying to achieve. So we've got that goal, and then send other calls to figure out, well, what are the related tasks or services or information that might be relevant to that. What else? There's two other things. What related things might there be that are not primary or secondary, that might be like sequentially follow-up tasks. And then one other item, which is also in this knowledge graph that somebody built, Maxwell, shout out to Maxwell, is like something, a notion of life stage. Because across government, I'm not sure how formal this is, but there's a lot of content that you could map to moving house or getting married or, these bereavement, these kind of things. So what I mean by a loop is we've nominally tried to figure out what are all those things. If we don't know those things, let's ask the user and find out. So that gets us into this place where we've got disambiguation for free, in a sense, because we don't know the goal. We can go and ask, okay, if we do have the goal, or we've got a level of confidence about the goal, let's figure out what's the most appropriate response for now. And I'm just trying to think of a simple way of putting this, because it does get a bit complex quickly. Choose a capability, let's say, and I'll explain. We can talk about what I mean by that.
Mm-hmm.
Choose a capability, or let's call it, for this conversation, let's call it a sort of state that the model is in. It's like, okay, so we've received something that is a complex thing that spans multiple departments. Therefore, we're going to treat this as a complex request. And the prescribed behavior to handle this is we're going to offer to build a plan for the user. Okay. Mm-hmm. And let's say we do that and they say, yeah, cool, let's do it. And then we go through a few turns of the conversation and we're building up a plan to tackle this tricky situation that they might be in. And then the user says, oh no, sorry, I was joking. I'm actually like a different person. And then the loop situation there, it just updates the goal or this context of what we're trying to achieve. And it's what I mean by loop is it's just this constantly updating context. Like, I'm going to call it an object, but it's just, like a list of text strings, really.
It's like a state machine. It's like a state machine, isn't it? Really,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
it's exactly that.
What's the users? I think the way that you, if I remember rightly, at the meetup, you had things like, what was the user's goal? What was it? It was something like what step are they in, or something like that, and then like what comes next, and then what might related queries be. So, like, for example, if I wanted to change the address on my driving license, I know we keep coming back to that example. If I wanted to change the address on my driving license, a kind of tertiary task might be you might want to do that on your passport. But then the goal might be update the address on the driving license, and then the step might be like stage 1 inquiry or whatever, or qualify or whatever. And then once I say, yeah, go on, then do it, then move into like step 2. Or it was something like that, wasn't it? Where it's like, I think from memory, it was like just looked like a JSON list of values that represent the current context and state of the conversation. Am I getting that right or not?
Yeah, exactly. That JSON list of the current state is exactly right. And like, let's try not to use driving. So let's say somebody wants to register a birth, and that's great. Like, we can't actually do that with the agent right now, but I don't see why we couldn't. And but then, okay, the context of that is, well, you're actually entitled to a lot of different benefits. If I can ask you a few questions and figure out what you're eligible for, this kind of thing. But I think the looping is also the fact that these journeys are not linear. So somebody might say, actually, I'll apply for that one because it's quick. I'm not going to do the others now. But also, we've just upsized our house, so I need to update go back to the address. But it's just, no matter what happens to the context, we store it, and we can always respond to it rather than reacting like a rag to like answer everything in one fell swoop. Something like that.
Yeah, that's interesting. And one of the other things you was talking about was I just had to pull up the slides because I want to jog my memory, but it was experiences are made. I can maybe link to these if you're happy to see them. Experiences are made in the transitions.
Yeah. So with so we were talking about states, like you said, in this state machine, and are we in a state where we're trying to understand what the goal is? We don't know. Are we in the situation where we know the goal, but we're trying to diagnose what the best solution is? Are we offering comparisons or summaries and offering to ask them questions to go deeper? Is it something more complicated? The In those experiences, there are all these moments where the leadership of the conversation changes, or there's a delay, or what else? I'll have to have a think. But actually, I've got a few notes here. Yeah, like there might be multiple things to do, but there'll be a sequence. We might want to offer alternatives. Or we might have done a thing, but we're going to come back to this previous thing that we mentioned that we know that we need to go back and solve. All these moments feel very weird if you do them without explaining why you're doing it or what's happening. So one example is I've just had a baby. I want to know what I'm entitled to, support I'm entitled to. If you just start asking like 7 or 8 questions without framing it properly, users typically start to feel like, well, what's going on? Like, where's this data going, and to what end? And that might sound like a simple example, but what I mean by a transition is just saying like, yeah, for sure, I can find out what you're applicable, what you're eligible for, but I'm just going to have to ask you a few questions.
Yeah.
And there's quite a big difference, like adoption wise and trust wise, when you do these. I'm not saying they're very important structurally, but experientially, like they make quite a big difference.
Yeah. It's like discourse markers, isn't it? Like, moving from one thing to another, or changing topics, or answering a question that's a bit of a digression and then bringing people back on track. I suppose it's all of that orientation of the user in that sort of situation, isn't it? Letting them know that there's a few questions coming, and then as you progress through, letting them know that like we're nearly done, or like finally this is the last question. It's kind of like helping to understand, I suppose, where they are in the experience, basically. And LLMs don't do that on their own particularly well, do they?
No, that's it. Like, I think this LLM software is really powerful, but it's just one piece of these products, along with states. I think need a lot of attention in design. Transitions between states, how to use the tools, and when. But that's a good point about orientation. Because you typically with an app or a website, you would have some kind of step thing, and so I think that's a good way of thinking about it, is trying to build that into the dialogue.
And then finally, I think one of the things you were talking about, which I think GDS has kind of historically been really good at, is saying less. And sometimes saying less is actually more. LLMs are so hungry to just throw the world at every response. But actually, extracting the most important thing that's needed at that time, I suppose I imagine there's a bit of an art and a science to that.
I think say less is what the kids say now, isn't it?
Is it?
Say no more.
Oh, is it?
So as soon as I made that slide, I was like,
I'm so far out of touch with what the kids say these days. That
honestly, it's embarrassing for me. But, you're right. So they're trying to be useful. They've been made to be useful, so they're trying to like generate. They do output all this information, and I think it's one thing to like select what is pertinent at any given time, which is the content design thing of like right information, right format at the right time. And I think it's another thing to actually implement that. And it's a bit of, I'm not going to say it's an art, but it's there isn't like a simple way of doing it. What I've tried to do in the prototypes that we're building right now is give the model a sense of when to be. Oh, I actually use Google's. I don't know if you've seen this talk by Google. It's about their UX writing practice.
Right.
It's on. It's old. It's like going back 8 years or so. It's at one of the, what's it called, I/O conferences.
Oh yeah, the I/O conferences. Yeah.
I/O. And I'll find it after if you like. But they talk about this tension between being clear, concise, and useful. And sometimes, it's good to dial those up and down, but you can never, they're always like competing against each other. So in some of the states of the prototypes that I'm building, sometimes it is like useful to to be more verbose, let's say. But there are a lot of occasions where it's not appropriate. So I'm just trying to figure out a good way of doing that. At the moment, I'm just telling it, for these ones, you need to be concise. For these ones, you can, make sure the user knows everything they need to do. But I've got a feeling there is probably a smarter, smoother way of doing that.
How is that? Is this all through prompting then? Just kind of like and guiding it in terms of, I don't know, is it based on subject matter? Is it based on query type, or like how does it understand when to be concise versus when not to?
The one that I'm working on right at the moment, we've designed. It's all prompts, but there are different states. So the way it works is the orchestrator has the system prompt in it, and it will decide which state it should be in based on this, like that persistent state object we talked about. So let's say it's in, and there's 4 states. So one is like generic. I can't remember all the titles actually, but one is a very simple, self-contained answer. One is something that you could give a generic overview for, but you're going to have to ask some questions to give a tailored, personalized response. There are things where it seems like the user is trying to compare one or two or more things. And then the other thing is just, we've called it complex because it's spanning departments and multiple services. How does it know which one to be in? At the moment, I think you can probably experiment with doing this programmatically against certain code. Like, I'm trying to figure out how to do this in a very reliable way, and I think there is a more reliable way, potentially. But at the moment, the orchestrator selects what it thinks is the appropriate state to be in, based on the goal that it's inferred. To be fair, it does work quite reliably, but the way we're designing this by building. So, we're always building, seeing what works and what doesn't, and tweaking from there. But that's totally different to production quality code. So, but in theory, this idea of selecting states to be in, I think is that mental model is useful, I think.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, I mean, I've had real trouble with this sometimes, but depending on the model you're using, Claude doesn't seem to ever want to actually follow any rules about being concise. And it just seems to be a nightmare. Maybe it's because I'm using I don't know, inferior model or whatever, but it's like, and because from a content design perspective, that used to be, I mean, when I used to work in, as I said, in local government, and one of the projects we had was redesigning our website. And obviously that's a massive content, everything's content on the website basically. It's all information architecture, and then down to kind of like how do we structure the page, all that kind of like pyramid design type of thing, most important things at the top, and we'll work back through the details, all this kind of stuff. And then it got to the point where at the sort of like, sentence level, how do we just only include the stuff that's relevant and get rid of everything superfluous? So why do we take 4 paragraphs to write something that we could say in 2 sentences? So like from a kind of like purist, not that I've ever been a content designer, but I've kind of worked with plenty. From a purist kind of content design perspective, there's a hell of a lot of effort that goes in to extracting the right level of meaning and crafting content in a way that gives, as you said, just enough at the right time, in the right format, etc. And translating all of that process to a model to get that concise bit right seems to me to be a kind of like, I don't know how reliable the models are at just saying be concise versus, you know, what a content designer would do. I don't know where I'm going with that, but it seems like quite a task, you know?
Yeah, I think I feel like there's a lot of, as the models get better, there are a lot of things where you can start to give less direction. But what I've found is, there's like a period where teams were spinning up these things, and the meme is like, you just have to write, you are a helpful assistant, and then you're done. Like the problem with saying be concise is it doesn't know what's relevant or not, because it doesn't know the meaning of the words, basically. Yeah. So, but it's, I think I'm right in saying it's all relative to that software. Everything's relative, but it needs to be relative to something. And what I mean by that is, like, it's much more effective to say be concise to the user's goal, if you've got the notion of a goal, because then it can look at what the goal is and make that a calculation of like, oh, that's actually not close. This is close. Being concise without that direction, I understand why it wouldn't be able to make that call. And that's why GDS did the whole user needs thing, if you're familiar with that, where every piece of content had to have a user need, and that's how you would know what to include or not. And just anecdotally, like I found a similar thing with including hyperlinks in responses. So I'm trying to have this is an experiment. I'm not saying this is always the best way to go, but only include hyperlinks if there's an actionable thing that they need to do, rather than saying, read more here, full guidance here, for more details, go here, which is useful as a source link maybe, but not in the, potentially if you're not going to act on it, why include it in the body? So I was thinking, well, how can we do that? And maybe the way to do it is to just use the user's goal as the reference point and say only include links if the actions behind the links would help the user get closer to that goal. Something like that.
Yeah. That makes sense, because I think like the value, I think, of conversational interfaces is everything that we've kind of been speaking about here is in terms of like mapping the state, understanding the user's goal, figuring out what the best logical next step is, understanding how to take a piece of information and condense it to a moment where it can specifically meet the needs of that user at that time. All of that is all about kind of starting wide. So the first time that an AI agent has a conversation with a user, everything's available, isn't it? You have no idea. And you go through this process of narrowing it down and building this context and understanding the user to the point where you can answer a question. It feels a little bit like just throwing a hyperlink in there and sending them off to a web page just expands that scope again, when you've worked so hard to really properly get them to a point where you really actually understand what they need, Yeah,
exactly. So like really high intent, I guess it's like old SEO. No, it's not like old per se, but thinking about SEO in terms of level of intent and only including very high intent links, because I do think there is an open question around, well, should everything be resolved in the chat window, or are these things actually, is chat more of a chat, meaning just a conversational interface? Like, is that in the future? I'm thinking, like, is it more just an aspect of all apps where you have normal apps, but you can converse with them, this hybrid multimodal thing. But for now, right at the moment, in this prototype, we're trying to be like, everything that's useful is in the chat and only link out if it's an action. Yeah. But I'm not saying that's a fixed design decision. I'm just playing around with how to, like you say, when you want to be concise, how do you make it that way?
Yeah. I think that you're kind of in the realms of progressive disclosure, aren't you? Which is that you can be concise in your response, but enable the user to dig deeper if they want to, and you can draw on the content that you would otherwise have given them a link to, but in a way that's a bit more contextual to their situation, really. That's another thing. I wonder if you've got any thoughts or experience on that, because I think that's where, again, going back to the typical RAG deployment, it's just ask a question, get an answer. No idea of what comes next, no idea of what relevance means for that answer based on the query, because you don't know the goal, etc. Whereas I think a lot of it for me is about like, how do you just distill that down into the smallest possible amount of information you can get away with? It's crisis maxims, isn't it? Crisis maximum quantity. The smallest amount you can get away with that's relevant and needed, and then you enable the user to then probe and ask more questions, which from an interaction design standpoint, I think sounds like a good idea. I don't know if the user behavior would follow it, but also technically, how then do you do that when these RAG systems just go and grab content and summarize content? I don't know if you've had any sort of experience with that whole sort of like progressive disclosure sort of element of trying to, be more concise.
Yeah, a bit. So if I talk about this current project, let's just see. There's at least two patterns which do something along those lines. So one is, I'm trying to think of a good use case for it. All right, so one is like to do with comparisons. So let's say somebody said, I'm starting a business, should I be self-employed or limited company? We spin up like a sort of main point. It's not side by side, it's stacked because it's on mobile, but these are like distilled pros and cons, basically. Scannable, going up and down. There's an ability to make it full screen, so it's easier to read. But we've done that, and then there's like a call to action at the bottom that says, if you want to delve deeper on either of these, we can do that. And that seems to work quite well. There's this other pattern where I've got this principle we're trying to work to, which is like give value early. So it is useful, I think, to ask questions so then you can give a personalized response. But sometimes it's frustrating to always, it's a little bit like being in a phone IVR system where you're clicking buttons and actually just want to get through. So we've got this pattern where we give a generic answer and then offer, if I can ask you, if you let me ask you a few questions, that kind of thing. So those are two forms of progressive disclosure. And they seem to work quite reliably, and that relies on this state thing. So being very explicit that, we're in the comparison state. And working through that, which is essentially a skill. It's like a stepped sequence of instructions in a text file.
Interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. How much has the kind of design role with conversational AI and with AI, how much of the design role has become a technical role versus a more creative? Because I think design used to be very much a creative discipline, but I think a lot of the conversation we've been having here has been around the bit that you actually need to implement to create the experience you want is actually more technical in nature. So I wonder, like for you in your role, have you gone from being more on the creative side, more technical, or how much technical do you need to be and all that kind of stuff these days?
Yeah, I think you've made me think of, I'm so bad with memes, but there's that meme and it's like, I have to see if I can draw it quickly and that's a bit stupid. There's like what is he like? A ninja master or something like that. Right, and he's got his hood up and he's like, it's not going to make much sense. But there's some guy here who looks really confused. Right. And then as he goes back to being a ninja again. Yeah. And I think like in my case, I was purely interested in experience and creating. Yeah. So very much in the logic, but mostly, interface and logic, but about outcomes. Then I feel like I had to learn lots of nitty gritty things and be in the weeds day to day. And there's a trap to that, which I'll explain in a second. And now I feel like the design role is more anchored to how it used to be, which is like envisaging what's possible, what could be possible. Right. Right. And I'll try and explain that. So I think the design role has changed in the sense you need to know how LLMs, what they're useful for. And I think it helps to be able to prototype. So maybe we can talk about that. But ultimately what you're trying to do is show it's like the art of the possible. It's like, we could do this, we could do this. And I think the trap of that graph is if you get really into the technical stuff of, let's say your company's got a RAG system and you're trying to improve that, your improvements are only going to be very incremental because you're going to be tweaking what already exists. Whereas I feel like you need to get away from the technology bit and think, we want, we've got this app, like what could it do? Rather than just, can we improve the conversational quality by 1%? But I think understanding that LLMs are good at like understanding intent and combining multiple needs and summarizing and thinking and knowing about their limitations is very useful. And I also think it's useful to let it go a bit and think what could be possible. And the thing to marry those two things, I think, is vibe coding, which we could probably chat about.
So is that how you tend to do a lot of prototyping, through vibe coding? Or another way? At
the beginning, like what I would, at the moment, maybe, if we speak next month, it might change. But at the moment, I think what I found is vibe code something that's close to what the sort of thing you're trying to make, and then change everything yourself from there with the help of whoever, ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, and have the LLM be able to read the code base, the repo, but just ask it what to do and do it yourself. So then you can learn. And I think doing it the other way, where sometimes you have Claude and it's like, I'll do it for you, and you just click okay, and then you've got no idea what's happened, but you don't know how your system works, and I found it often like makes other things worse. So it's a bit like one step forward, two back. But anyway, sorry, I would vibe code to get something spun up and then tweak manually.
Yeah. And is that kind of like, because it's interesting, I was literally this morning having a conversation with a client who is going through a bit of a challenging time getting support from certain areas of the business. So, for example, they want to launch this AI agent that does XYZ. That XYZ is done via an API that is provided by a contractor, and somebody sits in between the contractor and the business who still works for the business, but essentially they manage the contract. That person has been like, well, I don't want you building a chatbot because, we're not going to be able to see it. You're going to be raising loads of, tickets in the system that we, don't want you to do or whatever. And so they don't want it to happen. Yet the team we're working with has access to the API anyway, and can go and just build something using the API, and that's just that. And they're responsible for the customer experience part, and right now the customer experience is poor. And so it's been about 4 weeks, 5-6 weeks or so of these conversations going on. Maybe it's a bit less, maybe it's 2 or 3 weeks of these conversations going on with these people around, can we get access, can we not get access, what can we do, what can't we do, what you're happy with, what you're not happy with. And then literally this morning we were like, well, why don't you just build it? You don't have to be right, but just build it, and then at least you've got something to talk about and discuss and show, rather than this hypothetical nightmare that this person thinks is going to happen when you build when something goes live. Build it first and let's see, because it might be rubbish or it might be brilliant, and seeing it might change things.
Oh, it's great for that. Yeah, mitigating people's fears, because they obviously fill the blanks with like the worst case scenario. And I also think it's just, what's the word? There's a saying, I can't remember, but it's like worth 1,000 meetings to show, and I also just think there's no other way. It's a bit pretentious when I'm colleagues, we were trying to think like, what's a good analogy for it? And he was saying, it's like music improvisation, like you can annotate music improvisation, but it only exists when there's a performer and an audience in a room and, and I think, LLM systems, it's a bit of a stretch, but they come to life when you build, and you can't tell that, you have to show it.
Yeah. I think the music analogy is a good one. It's a little bit like, imagine having a workshop within which you are going to describe what a song is going to sound like when it's finished.
Yeah.
It's going to be impossible, isn't it? It's going to start out like this, and then there's going to be a saxophone that comes in. It's going to play these notes, and then you're never, ever, ever in a million years going to be able to do it justice. And it's the same sort of thing, I think.
Yeah. And also, like, this technology is very good at a limited number of things. So I know there are, like, for production code, there's a lot of things to consider, but for a demo, just to show, all we're talking about is this API speaking to an LLM that has access to this, database in memory or something like that. And I think it's that thing around the gaps that that people are left to imagine. They tend to see the downside risk.
Absolutely. What would your kind of parting advice be to designers or teams who are trying to make better experiences with AI?
I think one trap to get out of is being too narrow around like resolution. Like, what do you define as resolution? I think there's already a lot of teams. I haven't worked in loads of companies, but I worked in enough to know there's a premium on cost saving and resolving things quickly for people, which is good for people as well. But when you focus on those too narrowly, your customers will learn that that's what your product does, and adoption. I think a clearer way of putting it is, I can see LLM chatbots getting good at doing these narrow fixing things tasks and not doing much more, and they become like the new iPhone IVR. As like, it's not really something you want to interact with. It never does quite what you want. There's always a bit of a burden on you, and the industry gets good at congratulating itself for like delivering those things. And I'm not saying they're easy, and I think it's a commendable task to do it. But it's a cliche, but we're only just getting started, and it's one aspect of technology that does these discrete things. So look at, why don't you ask an LLM, what are you good at? And then think, like, how do I apply that? There's loads of examples, but there was a bank, I think it was Lloyd's, I can't remember. I just thought it was a neat thing. You're scrolling through your bank statement, and you can ask, what have I spent most of my money on this month? It's very simple. And so I think like grounding it in those kind of things rather than looking at a RAG system. RAG has its place, of course, but it's one piece.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's like, I think it's like going from the support, customer support type of stuff, like help me change my address, whatever, isn't it, into more of the kind of product-based stuff. Like, how do I get what I need from the service by just asking for it, like you're saying, like, how much have I spent on coffee last month, or even something that's a bit, maybe is what you wouldn't expect from your bank as such, but having it would be cool. For example, like that your bank is in a perfect position to be able to look at your spend and make an assessment of where your money's going. So just being able to say, look, how do I save money this month? Well, look at how much you spend in Costa, or look at how many trips to the shop you make during the week, and all this kind of little bits like that is like not stuff that's bread and butter for banks or whatever. And I'm sure there's these examples of use cases we could think of for for government and for many other industries. But I think I get exactly what you're saying. Yeah, don't get trapped in the pure support resolution stuff, and think about how you can use it to add value elsewhere.
Yeah, it's that. I know we're wrapping up, but being proactive, rather than people coming to you, what features could you have where it's offering, within reason, useful things? And then you just made me think, yeah, companies have got all this data. So like, what data do you have? And start there. I know IKEA do a lot of interesting stuff with that. Like, I've just seen some prototypes, but it's like using the data that's within your house. You can sort of speak to your house. And it's a bit weird.
That's good.
But look at what data you have is a good one. And this is about companies, isn't it? And strategy, but as a designer as well, look at what data you've got that you might be able to make into a feature that's obviously solving a real problem.
Yeah. Nice. Wicked. Well, Pete, this has been absolutely fantastic. Really appreciate you spending the time with us. It's been great.
No, likewise. Thanks for having me.
Thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you again on the next one. Thanks now. Bye.